Welcome back to Crypto 101. This is part 3. Follow me deeper down the rabbit hole now as we discover that with cryptocurrency becoming mainstream, we see how it has catapulted us into the third stage of the dismantling and transforming of the current geopolitical scenario that has resulted in our global financial renaissance, with Bitcoin being pivotal to this stage of technical advancement over the last few decades, beginning with the inception of the Internet of Things, followed a while later by genetic engineering, and a bit after that by smartphones. We saw in phase 2 of this dismantling process the development of 3D printing and other nanotechnologies. Then in phase 3, we see the development of AI, artificial intelligence, the blockchain, driverless cars, and smart machines. As we draw closer to a global financial renaissance and a cashless society, Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies has continued to permeate societies and grow exponentially. And in 2018, we see around 1,520 different cryptocurrencies to invest in, and a global market cap of around 440 billion US dollars at the time of this recording. So this is not going away anytime soon. Essentially, as governments continue to go bankrupt, they are going to have to redefine their means of exchange of value. In Venezuela, which is one great example, where Bitcoin was thriving due to hyperinflation at around something like 5,600%, can you believe? They have just launched their own crypto token called the Petro token, which kind of defeats the object of having a decentralized digital currency, because once a government gets its grubby little paws onto this beautifully pure organic digital currency and centralizes it, all we've done is transpose fiat currency for digital. Same, just different. Cryptocurrency is the new paradigm of wealth creation, for sure, especially amongst the millennials and Generation X, who do not have the same faith that the baby boomer generation had in their leaders. Well, some of us did. Governments printing fiat currency as and when they choose is exactly the reason we have a debt bubble and hyperinflation in the first place. And naturally, they just presumed that us lesser mortals, the zombified masses of sheeple, would be too comatose to realize by raising our consciousness we could unshackle ourselves from their simulated reality matrix. I'm thinking here of the peer-reviewed article published in 2001 by Professor Nick Bostrom of Oxford University called The Simulation Argument, in which he proves that we are living in a computer simulation. Up until late last year, we had the likes of Jamie Dimon on fake news mainstream channels trying his best to brainwash the masses that Bitcoin has no value. Now, I'm no mathematician, but it does not take a mathematician nor a PhD mathematician to calculate which is the more valuable. One US dollar bill, which costs around 20 US cents to print and can be printed at will, as the Fed does, or one Bitcoin, which by way of proof of work or proof of stake as well costs approximately $1,000 to mine, and there will ever only be a finite number of Bitcoin released, totaling some 21 million, and we know that around 4 million Bitcoin are already lost due just to carelessness and people's mistakes and throwing away their computers, etc., etc. The real financial experts, however, who know what they're talking about, have referred to Bitcoin as gold 2.0, and I tend to agree with them. None of you whom have done your due diligence on the crypto ecosystem can refute it has gained an irrepressible momentum of its own. And looking back, we see that a herd mentality kicks in around 19%, which is historically the tipping point in various scenarios of when a society or a group of people or a community tend to accept something, embrace it, and take it on board. We know that humans are intrinsically fearful and reticent to accept anything new. Heck, people were saying that the internet wouldn't survive. They were reticent to accept email and internet, and look, today we just cannot do without it. Currently, it's estimated that around 3% of businesses globally are already using cryptocurrency in their business models, be it for employee salary payments or trade purchases. By the end of this year, which is 2018, if not before, this is estimated to reach 10% adoptability. And by the end of 2020, we will have reached the 19% tipping point, where we see cryptocurrency and its adoptability completely integrated into society. As Mark Novogratz, the crypto billionaire, says, the herd is coming. And I say, the global financial renaissance hath arrived. Let's face it, back in the 80s, when the Internet of Things was first being invented, so many naysayers were saying that it was never going to catch on. Incidentally, the internet too developed initially without regulation, and over these few decades of its existence, these regulatory aspects evolved organically, making the internet what it is today, which is, of course, completely indispensable to us. I want to look at some of the historical evidence here and show you just how completely mind-boggling it really is. In 1350, it only took 19% of the populace to jumpstart what we know as the European Renaissance. Then in 1775, only 19% of citizens of the American colonies participated in the American Revolution. And in 1918, we see that only 19% of citizens of the old Soviet Russia were responsible for invoking what we know as the Russian Revolution. Here now are some more interesting facts to support this theory of 19%. I looked at Ford Motor Company as an example, and in 1908, when they launched their first Model T car, only 4% of US citizens believed that they needed a car. And then by 1920, which was just shortly after the end of World War I, approximately 19% of the US population were already driving their own cars. And just 7 short years later, we see that 90% of the US population owned their own vehicles, just as the 15 millionth Ford was rolling off the production belt, so to speak. So it didn't take long at all. And I want to illustrate a few more irrefutable statistics as to why cryptocurrency is here to stay, due to other radical, transforming, historic black swan and X events that occurred under some kind of Pluto-Uranus alignments and its radical reformations. And I looked at 3 eras, really, three periods in history. 2008 to 2020, then previously the era of 1960 to 1972, and then prior to that, a period in history of 1928 to 1937. Most recently, between 2008 and 2020, we see that this alignment brought about mainly societal disillusionment. Just prior to that period, which began in 2008, we saw in 2006 the inception of WikiLeaks, with Julian Assange being its founder, and resulting in many whistleblowing publications that has really changed the way we all think about the world that we thought was our reality. In 2008, of course, we saw the financial crash of the housing bubble. Shortly after that, gay marriage was legalized. 2009, of course, was the birth of cryptocurrency and the blockchain technology. 2010, we saw the Occupy Wall Street movement and many other Occupy movements. In 2011, the Fukushima nuclear fallout took place. Then there was a very busy period of lots of other planetary stuff going on between 2012 and 2015, and we saw Edward Snowden revealing the secrets of the NSA and the deep state, which also had a radical transformatory effect on the world as we knew it. We saw the collapse of the Greek central banking system, the uprising of the Arab Spring. We saw Bernie Madoff saga taking place with his massive, the biggest Ponzi scheme, well, second biggest Ponzi scheme in history. In 2016, we saw the Hillary email fiasco. 2017, we saw the first female granted driving rights in Saudi Arabia. Now, to women in the West, this might have little or no impact, but nonetheless, this is massive on a global scale. The ripple effect globally touched everybody everywhere, because we thought that those laws were immutable, and we saw that actually things have the ability to change. We saw also official disclosure in the New York Times, of all places, which is usually, a big proponent of fake news, but they published late last year, in 2017, I think it was just after the eclipse time, they published official disclosure on the existence of ET life. So incredible, really. In 2018, the Italian economy is on the brink of collapse. And just a couple months ago, sometime late January, at the time of me doing all my research, the stock exchange fell by 1,175 points in the blink of an eye. And of course, we saw Elon Musk launching his Falcon X rocket. We see totally unpredictable X events under similar Uranus alignments. In 1991, during a Uranus-Neptune conjunction, for instance, the rapid collapse of Soviet Russia took place, known as perestroika. Nobody foresaw this coming. No astrologers had predicted this. It literally was known as an X event. It just came out of nowhere. In 1999, there was, of course, the tech bubble implosion. And then that era that I had a look at, 1962, 63 to the early 70s, under a Pluto-Uranus conjunction, when JFK came into power, we saw loads and loads of uprisings and protests. We saw the hippie movement, flower power, the psychedelics movement. We saw gay liberation and sexual liberation movements. We saw the women's empowerment movement, and protests like burning their bras in public in the 60s. We saw the blacks' civil rights movement. In 1966, the Vietnam War, and freedom from British colonialization taking place in the developing world. There was also the space race between the US and Soviet Russia, and the subsequent moon landing in 1969. And we saw the rise of science and technology, and the first computers coming into existence. And then in that previous era that I had a look at, 1929 to say 1940, under a Pluto-Uranus square, which was just about, at the beginning of the Second World War, when both Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Hitler gained power. We saw the Great Depression taking place, the breakdown of global economy, gold confiscation took place, the rise of populist movements across the globe, such as Nazi Germany, in Italy with Il Duce, and Japan. And there's so many more. There are just too many to even mention. Then going back to a previous era, 1896 to 1907, under a Pluto-Uranus opposition, in the early 20th century, we saw breakthroughs with inventions like motor vehicles and electricity. We saw the uprising of the women's suffrage movement, culminating in women being allowed to vote in 1920. That was in the US, and then in the UK and Europe, that followed suit in the late 20s, around 1928, I believe. We saw also the creation of the middle class in society. Then moving further back in history, between 1845 and 1856, under a Pluto-Uranus conjunction, an industrial revolution occurred in Europe, followed shortly by the invention of petroleum not too long after that. In 1876-77, during a Pluto-Uranus waxing square, the telephone and the record players were invented, and the first railroad came about. And then moving further back, and I'll share with you just one last fascinating fact under a Pluto-Uranus opposition. The Gutenberg printing press and the printing of the first Bible came into being. And we see other completely unpredictable and incredibly transformational X-events taking place under similar Uranian alignments. To speak about our current financial crisis, the astrology depicts that the effects we are experiencing now, early in 2018, of the dismantling of the financial socio-economic scaffolding, began in fact around 1998, 1999 with the dot-com bubble, followed in 2007, 2008 with the financial crash brought about by the infamous housing bubble. And each of these planetary alignments activated and were activated by previous ones, and vice versa, from what I can understand. As I say, I'm not a qualified astrologer, but the research is pretty self-explanatory. And whilst the global elite would love us to continue being high tax paying consumers in their extend and pretend simulated matrix and remain in debt from the cradle to the grave. Thankfully, finally, the masses are standing up and saying, we're mad as hell and we're not going to take it any longer. They would love to have you believe that Bitcoin and the crypto space is a bubble. And they are way off the mark. Because in my humble opinion, I believe, actually it's more than a belief, I know that the Bitcoin and the cryptoverse is the pin that bursts the long overdue fiat bubble. And amen to that. Of course, greedy governments want a piece of the pie, and hence governments like China, South Korea, heck, even the EU and the US are trying their damnedest to quash the entire crypto space, leaving them a wide berth to continue printing fiat currency left and right. And let's face it, it's their only hope of continuing to keep us enslaved and, of course, keep themselves at the top of the heap. It was only just a month ago that Lloyds Bank here in the UK banned transactions to crypto exchanges by its customers. And their lame excuse was to help prevent money laundering. Now, the mob and the CIA and other mafia around the world are the largest of the drug cartels on the planet. And they've been laundering money just fine, thank you very much, using good old paper money. Now, I'm interested to hear what banks in your neck of the woods are doing. So please share that with me. I mentioned a bit ago about how the tipping point was about to happen in 2019, 2020. And in just 9 years, we now have the choice of 1,500 digital currencies since the inception of Bitcoin in 2009. So there's loads of changes on the horizon and things becoming legitimate. February the 8th, the state of Arizona legislated to make Bitcoin and other cryptocurrency legal tender for paying taxes, for instance. Now, that's what I call crafty. You know, if you cannot beat them, join them. Also out of that neck of the woods, the Nevada Independent published an article about a mystery company called Blockchain LLC, having just purchased around 67,000 acres in Nevada, directly adjacent to the Tesla battery manufacturing plant, incidentally. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on what you feel is going on there, and if you know anything about who the proprietors are of Blockchain LLC, and what perhaps you've read in the media or in the back channels about what they propose to do with this massive piece of land. We also see that Bank of America stated late February in an article saying that they can no longer compete with cryptocurrencies as it continues to permeate the markets. Recently, just last week, in fact, on Russia Today, JP Morgan too finally admitted that the cryptoverse is a threat to traditional banking. I think they termed it as such. We see that Turkey, China, and Iran are about to follow suit with Venezuela and have announced that they are launching their own state-backed crypto token very soon. Also, the University of Vienna has a cryptocurrency department now, I believe. And we see that Mark Novogratz as well will be launching the world's first crypto merchant bank very soon. And there's loads and loads of other happenings in the market, and I'll delve a bit deeper into these things in future videos. We also see that Bitcoin ATMs continue to pop up in major cities all over the world. And I'd love to hear whether you've spotted one of these in your area, or better yet, whether you've had the opportunity to purchase cryptocurrency through a Bitcoin ATM. I am delighted to have shared these interesting facts with you today, and I'm certain that many of you have been feeling for a long time now how the veils are thinning and lifting. And people everywhere are waking up to the truth. And our BS radars are becoming more finely tuned by the hour. In some cases, for the very first time, people everywhere are seeing through the illusion of having been entrained and shackled for so many decades and for so many centuries throughout time. And we are now ready to get off that merry-go-round known as the extend and pretend matrix. Before saying goodbye, I want you to be ever mindful that it is your birthright to be abundant. And as we stand on the precipice of this golden age, remember that never before has there ever been a more exciting time to be alive. Thanks to the crypto ecosystem, never before in history have there ever been so many self-made millionaires and billionaires on this planet. And you can be too. Let's continue together to build the strongest crypto community ever. I thank you so much for watching my debut video series, and I look forward to hearing all your points of view, your input, and your comments. Please tap the subscribe button before you go and share this with your friends and your family and everyone you know. And until my next video, to all my beautiful co-creators of wealth and abundance, go forth, cryptoply, and hodl.